Thank you for having me, Hani. I think that what Europe experienced during the last version of the Munich conference in Germany was a rude awakening. They were on the receiving end of a rude awakening. Europe realized suddenly that they are nothing but a subordinate force to the United States, a proxy of the United States, a second player or a supporter or a sidekick of the United States. Because when the United States decided to kick them around publicly and dismantle the structures that held them together, the globalist project in general, it actually caused them to panic, and they suddenly realized that they cannot survive on their own. J.D. Vance took jabs at the leaders of European countries, to the modus operandi of many of the European political classes, basically. And also, he made it very clear that the new administration in the United States is not on board with what Europe stands for at the moment, politically, even economically, in terms of tariffs and in terms of protectionism, and of course militarily and from the security standpoint. And of course, this has sent shockwaves across Europe recently, and how the United States is trying to unilaterally settle the Ukraine conflict, and how they are trying to, and how the current U.S. administration and many of its leading members are openly supporting the right-wing elements and right-wing parties and politicians in several European countries. Some of them that will experience elections very soon, including Germany, the leader of the European Union, basically. So I think they have grounds for alarm, yet they should never have been surprised that this would be their ultimate fate, the Europeans, I mean.
Yes. Well, sir, you've mentioned Trump's foreign policy is increasingly aligning with Europe's far-right movements. So how do you see this shift affecting the European politics, and could it lead to a more fragmented EU? And you've also mentioned the upcoming German elections, the leader of the EU. So how do you see the European politics shifting or shaping up in the near future?
They will drastically change, because most of the European far-right parties and populist parties are actually Eurosceptic. They do not believe in the viability of the European Union. They do not believe in the core values that hold the European Union together. And they do not even believe in the economic principles that hold the European Union together. So this is a very dangerous development. We already have far-right populist governments in a country like Hungary with Viktor Orban, in a country like Slovakia recently with the election of the Prime Minister Fico, and now in Germany, the AfD, the Alternative Party for Germany, is polling second in the upcoming election. They might actually cross the 20% threshold in the upcoming election. This, of course, will make them fall short of forming a government. However, the current governing party, the SDP, the Socialist Party of Chancellor Scholz, will probably, along with the Green Party, lose this election. Probably we will have a Christian Democrat party government, a coalition government. I don't think anyone, of course, is going to actually cooperate or try to form a coalition with the AfD, but the AfD does have substantial influence. And the United States, the current government of the U.S. or the administration, openly supports and endorses the AfD and their leaders. So, of course, this is very alarming. And the AfD is Eurosceptic. It is actually very sympathetic towards the Russian, meaning that they are not in favor of supporting Ukraine. So this could be a disaster. However, I don't think they will form a government. However, yet they will be a factoring force that will pressure the EU further and make it that could potentially make it less viable, especially if they have a big amount of seats in the Bundestag that can actually obstruct German EU-oriented policies, if you know what I mean, and especially yes, German funding and loans for other EU countries.
Mm-hmm. Well, there are concerns, sir, that Trump is preparing to strike a deal with Putin over Ukraine now without any input from European leaders. Could this mark the beginning of U.S. disengagement from NATO's security structure?
I'm afraid so, yes. I think now there are indications that the United States during the Munich conference have made it very clear that they are not interested in maintaining any long-term, exaggerated long-term security arrangements in Europe, and definitely a deal with a unilateral deal between Russia and the United States. Regarding Ukraine, probably will not only address Ukraine, the upcoming negotiations in Saudi Arabia, they will also address the geopolitics of both Russia and the United States. And it's reported that the U.S. is willing to reduce its military presence inside Europe as part of an agreement with Russia, meaning basically giving Russia some of the security demands it demanded before the invasion of Ukraine in 2022. One of them was the reduction of NATO forces in Eastern Europe, in the eastern part of NATO. And the U.S. reportedly is willing to withdraw troops from the Baltic states, which were former members of the Soviet Union, not even the Warsaw Pact. So, of course, this will be a watershed moment in Europe, the European security structure. It will be a decisive blow to the idea of collective security, to the idea of the long-term, unconditional U.S. commitment to the security of NATO and the European Union, whose members, the majority of its members are members of NATO. So, of course, the Europeans are genuinely concerned, and that's why they are thinking of increasing their own collective defense arrangements within the premise of EU and even within the premise of NATO. And now they are trying to pledge more security assistance and military aid to Ukraine to ensure that Zelensky and his government will not succumb to U.S. pressure and will not yield to the Russian demand, because apparently any potential agreement in the foreseeable future, at least with the variables we see, will not take into consideration properly Ukrainian interests and will be very in favor of Russian interests, basically, and will be more conducive to their demand. However, I do not think the Europeans can fill this gap. The Europeans do not even have the capacity to defend themselves.
Yes.
So I think that it's a lost cause, Hani.
Dr. Osman, one final question because we're running out of time, so let's make this quick now by quoting the nationalist leaders like Hungary's Viktor Orbán while sidelining traditional allies. Is Trump signaling a break from America's historic role as Europe's protector?
Oh, yes, he's making that very clear. He said that you have to pay for protection. So that doesn't mean that he will entirely disengage, because if Trump entirely disengages from Europe and abandons Europe, this will be a geopolitical suicide for the United States. I don't think even Trump would be crazy enough to pursue such a course of action. However, he will be willing to exert concessions and make them pay for that protection. He is asking them to up the expenditure of GDP on defense to 3%, and now he's even demanding that it rises to 5%. And that's way above the 2% threshold stipulated by NATO. So yes, he will ask them to pay for protection.
Yes.